Welcome to British Focus, your go-to channel for the latest political developments and critical issues shaping the UK. Today, we dive into a story that is causing serious waves on the international stage. Prime Minister Keir Starmer appears ready to defy Donald Trump on the future of the Chagos Islands, as Downing Street signals its determination to push forward with a sovereignty deal with Mauritius, despite strong opposition from Washington. This controversial move has sparked security concerns within Trump's inner circle, with fears that the transfer of control could shift the balance of power in the Indian Ocean. What does this mean for Britain's global standing? How will it impact UK-US relations? We break it all down in today's report. But before we begin, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to British Focus, and join our growing community. Your support helps us bring you the most important updates with clear and in-depth analysis. Now, let's get into it. The Chagos Islands have long been at the center of a geopolitical storm, but now, under Keir Starmer's leadership, the UK is finally taking steps to rectify a historical wrong. The Prime Minister appears determined to return sovereignty of the islands to Mauritius, despite fierce opposition from none other than Donald Trump and his allies. And let's be honest, this reaction from Washington is hardly surprising. For decades, the United States has wielded control over the strategically vital Diego Garcia military base, and now, the prospect of having to operate under an agreement with Mauritius seems to have sent alarm bells ringing in Trump's inner circle. But let's take a step back and examine what's really at play here. The fear-mongering from Trump and his allies suggests that handing back control to Mauritius somehow equates to weakening Western security and empowering hostile powers like China and Iran. This narrative is, at best, misleading, and at worst, a desperate attempt to maintain outdated neo-colonial control over a region that Britain should have returned years ago. The argument that the transfer of sovereignty would allow China and Iran to expand their influence in the Indian Ocean is speculative at best. Mauritius has every reason to protect its sovereignty while maintaining strong diplomatic ties with the West, especially considering its economic and political interests. Are we really expected to believe that Mauritius, a nation that has engaged diplomatically with the UK and the broader international community, would suddenly hand over control of its territory to Beijing or Tehran? That is little more than a fabricated crisis meant to serve Washington's interests. Let's not forget the historical context here. The Chagos archipelago was separated from Mauritius by the UK in the 1960s under dubious circumstances, with the local population forcibly removed to make way for the Diego Garcia military base. It was a disgraceful act that left generations of Chagosians displaced, living in exile, and fighting for recognition of their rights. This isn't just a political issue, it's a moral one. The UK has an obligation to correct this injustice, and Starmer's decision to move forward with negotiations is a long overdue step in the right direction. If Britain is serious about upholding international law and maintaining credibility on the world stage, then returning the islands to their rightful owners is not just the right thing to do, it's the only thing to do. Of course, this decision isn't happening in a vacuum. The timing is significant, coming as Mauritius signals that it has secured further concessions from the UK during negotiations. While the exact details remain unclear, reports indicate that Britain is considering an annual payment of £90 million to maintain access to Diego Garcia. Now, some may see this as a high price to pay, but let's be realistic. Military presence comes at a cost, and if Britain truly values its ability to continue operating in the region, then these financial commitments should be seen as part of a fair and just agreement. Mauritius has every right to demand compensation and guarantees that benefit its economy. After all, it is reclaiming land that was unjustly taken from it in the first place. Predictably, Trump's allies are not taking this lightly. Figures like Marco Rubio have issued stark warnings about the so-called security risks of this agreement, going as far as to suggest that China could gain valuable intelligence on US military operations. This kind of alarmism is not just unfounded, it's hypocritical. The United States has military bases in dozens of countries, many of which are under the sovereignty of foreign governments. Why is it suddenly a problem when Mauritius is involved? The reality is that Washington's objections have little to do with actual security threats and everything to do with maintaining hegemony in the region. The idea that the UK should indefinitely hold on to territory that was never truly its own just to satisfy American interests is absurd. And let's be honest, Trump's opposition to this move isn't driven by some grand strategic vision. His foreign policy has always been erratic, guided more by knee-jerk reactions and a desire to project dominance than by any genuine concern for security. His administration's approach to international diplomacy was marked by unpredictability and short-sighted decision-making. Now, as he prepares for a potential return to the White House, he and his allies are trying to reassert their influence over issues that should be none of their concern. The UK has every right to make sovereign decisions without being dictated to by a former US president and his circle of advisors. That being said, we cannot ignore the real risks that come with any geopolitical shift. China's influence in the Indian Ocean is a genuine concern, and it would be naive to dismiss it outright. Beijing has aggressively expanded its presence in the region through economic deals, infrastructure projects, and military partnerships. However, the best way to counter this influence is through strong diplomatic relationships and fair agreements, not through outdated colonial-era power plays. By working with Mauritius rather than against it, the UK can ensure that Diego Garcia remains a critical military asset without resorting to the kind of heavy-handed tactics that defined past decades. So, where does this leave us? The UK must stand firm in its commitment to this deal, despite the noise coming from Washington. Starmer is right to move forward with negotiations, and Britain has an opportunity to demonstrate that it respects international law and the rights of the people of Mauritius. The notion that handing over sovereignty will somehow unravel Western security is nothing more than a smokescreen designed to maintain the status quo. If the US has concerns about China and Iran, it should address them through its own diplomatic and strategic initiatives rather than trying to strong-arm the UK into maintaining an unjust territorial claim. At the end of the day, this is about justice. It's about correcting historical wrongs, upholding Britain's credibility, and ensuring that international agreements are based on fairness rather than coercion. Trump and his allies will continue to push their fear-driven narrative, but the UK has a chance to show leadership by doing what is right, not what is convenient for Washington. What do you think? Should Britain listen to the US, or should it finally do what it should have done decades ago and return the Chagos Islands to their rightful owners? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to British Focus for more in-depth analysis. Other news now. It has been 5 years since the UK formally left the European Union, and yet, as Nigel Farage so aptly pointed out in his recent speech in Northwest Essex, Brexit remains an unfinished project. The man who arguably played the biggest role in securing that victory now stands before us, not to bask in triumph, but to call out those who betrayed the very cause they once claimed to champion. And let's be clear, his words were not just empty rhetoric. Farage is right. Boris Johnson and Michael Gove never truly wanted Brexit. They saw it as a political tool, a way to climb the Conservative Party ladder, and once they got what they wanted, they abandoned the core principles that made Brexit a success in the first place. Do you remember the morning after the referendum? The looks on the faces of Johnson and Gove were not those of men who had just secured a historic victory. They were in shock, perhaps even regretful, because for them, Brexit was never about sovereignty or taking back control. It was a game. A game about who would lead the Conservative Party, who could outmaneuver whom, and who could seize the throne at Downing Street. And what happened once Johnson was in power? He made all the right noises, played to the gallery, and then failed at delivering the most fundamental promise of Brexit, controlling our borders. Let's not mince words here. The Conservative government has utterly failed in managing immigration post-Brexit. The figures speak for themselves. Net migration has soared, reaching nearly 1 million in a single year. 1 million. And the crisis in the English Channel? Worse than ever. We were told that Brexit would mean an end to unchecked migration, that Britain would finally have the power to decide who enters and who does not. Instead, we have seen an explosion in illegal crossings, with over 130,000 young men arriving in small boats since we left the EU. Where is the sovereignty in that? Where is the control? This was not what people voted for in 2016. And let's talk about the Conservative leadership's response to all this. Camilla Badenoch and her allies want us to believe that they represent the true Conservative values of Britain. But if that were the case, why has her government allowed this crisis to spiral out of control? Why has the party that was elected on the back of Brexit so blatantly ignored the will of the people? The answer is simple: because they never believed in it. They saw Brexit as a tool to win elections, not as a genuine movement for national sovereignty. They have betrayed the very people who put their trust in them. This is why Farage's speech matters. Reform UK is gaining traction because it is filling the void left by the Conservative Party's betrayal. There is a growing number of people who feel abandoned, people who voted for Brexit in good faith, only to watch the promises of border control and national independence be trampled on by a government that is more concerned with appeasing the political elite than serving its own citizens. And can we blame them for feeling betrayed? Of course not. Millions of Britons voted for Brexit because they wanted to restore order to a system that had failed them for years. They wanted their voices heard. And yet, 5 years later, they are still waiting. The Conservative Party has failed. It has failed to control migration, failed to respect the will of the people, and failed to uphold the principles that Brexit was built on. The betrayal is real, and it should not be forgiven. Britain deserves leaders who will stand by their word, who will fight for the sovereignty that the people demanded, and who will not treat Brexit as a political game but as a mandate for real change. So, where does that leave us? The momentum is shifting. Reform UK is growing, and as Farage pointed out, people are waking up to the fact that the Conservative Party no longer represents them. In northwest Essex alone, nearly 500 people have joined Reform UK, and that number is only set to rise. There is energy, there is optimism, and most importantly, there is a movement that refuses to let the establishment get away with its betrayal. What do you think? Did Boris Johnson and the Conservatives betray Brexit? Has immigration spiraled out of control despite the promises made in 2016? And is Reform UK the answer Britain needs? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to British Focus for more hard-hitting analysis on the political issues that matter most to Britain. Other news: King Charles III is once again proving that he is not a monarch stuck in the past, but a leader determined to modernize the way the royal family is perceived. His latest project, a feature-length documentary produced by Amazon Prime, is a bold step forward, breaking away from the traditional royal narratives controlled by the likes of the BBC and ITV. And frankly, it's about time. For decades, royal documentaries have been predictable, often sanitized portrayals that lack genuine insight. Now, with a major streaming platform backing the production, we have a chance to see something different, something that actually reflects Charles's vision, values, and ambitions. The decision to film at Dumfries House in Scotland is significant. This isn't just about palaces and prestige, it's about showcasing the King's dedication to environmental sustainability, community projects, and the idea that the monarchy should be a force for positive change. Unlike previous royal productions, which often felt like controlled PR exercises, this documentary aims to show rather than tell, to immerse the audience in Charles's world without the scripted formalities that have defined past efforts. And let's not ignore what this means for the media landscape. The BBC and ITV have long been the gatekeepers of royal storytelling, shaping public perception with a level of control that has often bordered on editorial bias. By stepping away from these traditional broadcasters and partnering with Amazon Prime, Charles is making a statement: the monarchy must evolve with the times. Streaming services reach a younger, more global audience, people who might not tune in to a BBC special but who are engaged with digital media. This is a smart move, ensuring that the royal family remains relevant in an era where audiences demand authenticity, not outdated pomp and ceremony. Of course, the critics will argue that this is just another publicity stunt, another attempt to win favor at a time when the monarchy faces growing scrutiny. But let's be honest, the royal family has always had to justify its existence. If Charles is willing to embrace innovation, challenge outdated media norms, and present himself in a way that is more in touch with modern Britain, then surely that's a step in the right direction. What do you think? Is this the kind of change the monarchy needs, or is it just a rebranding exercise? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to British Focus for more analysis on the key issues shaping the UK.